Hi everyone, VERYBASICS here, and welcome back to this second part of the Marvelous Designer intro course, where we'll be putting our newly learned skills into practice and create this skater outfit by making some top and bottom garments from scratch. And just a reminder, all the assets and resources we'll be using throughout this course will be available to download on my Gumroad or ArtStation here, which I'll link in the description below, so I'd highly recommend downloading it if you want to follow along. So the first step in my process before I start off making anything in Marvelous Designer is to find reference for what I'm looking to create. So these days I find it's really not hard to find inspiration for new designs, as there's always such an abundance of stuff on platforms like Instagram, Pinterest, and so on. So I'm usually just saving things I like to collections as I go. But just in case you are in the unlikely position of being in need of inspiration, I would recommend your run-of-the-mill type fashion design websites such as Hypebeast or Hightar, as they usually post everything the big labels drop and tend to provide a pretty good barometer for what is on trend at the moment. Then what I'll do, and what I also find helps me focus on the task at hand, is to compose a mood board folder where I'll only save images of what I'm looking to create. Otherwise, it can just be like looking into an abyss if I go into my Instagram collections. So in this case, you can see the vibe I'm going for is a sort of 90s skater look, and then I've narrowed it down to focusing on these type of ripped acid wash jeans and a simple baggy hoodie with maybe a graphic on it. And now that I've got what I want to make established, we can jump back into Marvelous Designer and start getting to work. So firstly, I'm just going to get rid of all the garments we created in the last video by selecting all of them and then pressing delete. And now we can begin on making our jeans. So we'll start off on the most obvious part, which is the jean legs themselves. So let's select our polygon tool to create the outline of our first jean leg. And for mine, I'm just going to make this roughly cover the silhouette of our avatar here in the 2D pattern window, up to about his waist, which looks like, according to our handy little dimensions here, about 960mm. Then, like in the last video, I'm going to use the smooth curve tool to soften this hard edge here. So clicking on the corner point and then dragging inwards, like so. Now what we're going to want to do is create the rest of our jean legs. We'll want 2 for the front and 2 for the back. So rather than manually creating each individual leg, we'll open up our quick menu and choose the symmetric pattern tool instead, which, as the title suggests, will copy and paste our pattern in a symmetric mirrored way to our original. I'm then just going to select both the front legs and use the shortcut Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V to copy and paste them as our back legs, and then position them into place in the 3D viewport. So the great thing about the symmetric pattern tool is that when I go in and edit our back legs here using the edit pattern tool, you'll see they both update together. And that's because the symmetric pattern tool uses linked editing to ensure anything we clone as an instance of that original pattern will update later when we make changes to it. And because we copy and pasted the second set, instead of using the symmetric pattern again, we now will have 2 individual sets of linked patterns, our front legs and our back legs. Next, we'll want to start stitching these together. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and use the segment sewing tool we went over earlier. So again, left clicking on our corresponding segments, making sure to click on the same directional notch so we get these nice clean perpendicular lines like so. Then we'll just work our way around until we've got all of our edges ready and then simulate. And as you can see, we're getting a pretty droopy result. So to fix this, we're going to need to give our jean legs a waistband to hold them up. So let's go ahead and add in a rectangle here, and then select the Add Point Split Line tool, and add a new point at about the halfway mark on our bottom edge. Then, using the quick menu, we'll again use the symmetric pattern tool to create a clone for the second side of the waistband. We'll then position these roughly into place in the 3D viewport, before again using the segment sewing tool to attach our waistband to the jean legs, making sure to also sew the sides of our waistband together as well. We can then proceed to adjust the fit of the pants on our avatar by using the Transform Pattern tool to reposition them in the 3D viewport. as well as the edit pattern tool itself to lengthen or shorten the different components of our garment we've just created. So once we're happy with the basic fit of the pants on our avatar, we can start going more in depth by editing the fabric settings for what will be our denim material of the jeans. So firstly, I'm going to rename the current fabric we have assigned to our jeans to denim, and then I'm going to give this a light bluish colour for the meantime, just so we can see it a bit clearer in the viewport. Now, to get this simulating more accurately as to how jeans would typically sit in real life, I'm going to go in here to our physical property settings and change this preset to Denim Raw. And then lastly, before simulating again, we want to select all our patterns in the 2D pattern window and change the particle distance from 20 to 10, which, as we went over in the earlier intro, will just increase the resolution of our simulation mesh. And now, as you can see with those tweaks, our simulation is starting to look a lot more like denim, with these sort of creases and folds we're getting here. And I'm just going to increase the width of our upper leg here so the jeans are fitting a bit better around the thighs. So again, using the Add Point Split Line tool, I'm going to insert a point before repositioning it and then smoothing it out using the Smooth Curve tool. Next, we're going to add in our pockets. So we'll use the internal polygon line tool to create a simple arc shape on the top corner of one of our front legs. We can then finesse the shape of this using the edit pattern tool, making sure our endpoints are sitting perfectly in line with our jean edges so it will cut correctly for the next step. We'll then open up our quick menu and use the offset as internal line tool. So I'm just going to set this to 10mm and then reverse direction so it goes the way I want it to. And then again, just making sure these endpoints are in line with our edge before we select both of these internal lines, and then use the cut and sew tool to divide them into separate patterns. So now what we can do is give our pocket edge here a bit more thickness by opening up the quick menu and using the Layer Clone Over tool. And what that's going to do, as you can see, is create a copy of our previous pattern that will automatically stitch right over the top when we simulate. So we'll continue to use this same process of offsetting, cutting and sewing, and then layer clone overing for a lot of the details of our jeans. I'll now repeat this methodology to create some side seams for our jeans, first selecting the edge using the Edit Pattern tool, then offsetting a 10mm internal line, before once again cutting and sewing followed by a layer clone over. Now, depending on the side of our jeans, you might have to use the layer clone under tool instead of the over one, which will just flip the direction of the overlap. Now to create the back pockets. We'll use the internal polygon line tool again to just draw in a basic pocket shape, which we can then fine tune using the Edit Pattern tool. We'll then use the Cut and Sew tool to separate this as a new pattern, followed by a layer clone under this time to give it that extra thickness. Then lastly, I'm just going to again offset our outline as an internal line, and then cut and sew so it'll give us a nice crease when we simulate. Next, we can move on to the waistband belt for our jeans. So to start off with, I'm going to layer clone over both halves of the pattern to give it some thickness, before then going up here to our rectangle tool and creating a new small rectangle about the height of our waistband, which will be our first belt loop. Let's now position this approximately in the 3D viewport here. And because it's quite small, we can use the shortcut F, which will zoom into whatever we have selected. So, in order to sew this loop to our jeans, we're going to need to add in some extra dividing points on our waistband first. So let's go ahead and select the Add Point Split Line tool, and then add in some dividing points, roughly matching the width of our loop, which in my case is about 12mm. We can then use the segment sewing tool to stitch our belt loop to the new matching edges we just created, and now we should be getting our desired result. I'm then just going to once again increase the particle distance of our new pattern from the default of 20 to something pretty high res like 5, considering how small it is. I then continued working my way around the rest of the waistband, copy and pasting these belt loops and repeating the same process of adding in division points, followed by then segment sewing them to the waistband afterwards. Following this, I just continued to add some extra detail based on our reference image, using the same process we've been going over for the last few elements by adding in internal lines, followed by an offset, cut and sew, and layer clone over or under. So it's really up to you how detailed you want to get here, but for me, I just wanted to add in this front zipper flap and a few more detail seams at the back, and I was good with it. Next, I'm going to add in a button. So first I selected the buttonhole tool and then placed this in the very left corner on the overside of my waistband. I then selected the button tool and placed this directly on top of it. I'm then going to come over and select on the default button in the object browser, and then in the property editor change the shape to something more of my liking, like this one. So now we can move on to the fun part, or at least in my eyes is the kind of more fun part, which is texturing and graphics. So let's start by giving our denim material a bit of texture. To do this, we'll first select our denim material in the Fabrics tab of the object browser, and then come down into the property editor and click on this 4 squares icon here. Let's then choose the denim seamless image, which is located in the resources folder of the download. And now, as you can see, we've got our image mapped across all the patterns we've assigned that material to. So it's looking good, but we probably want to make the size of the denim a bit smaller. So to do this, we can come up here to the texture tools located above the 2D pattern window and choose the Edit Texture tool. So this tool allows us to scale, move, and rotate the mapping of our texture. So I'll just pull this middle diagonal line down until I'm happy with the overall size. Next, I'm going to create a new fabric for our denim seams and detail. So I'm just going to select our existing denim fabric in the object browser and then press copy and rename this to denim trim. Now if we come down to the property editor, we can press the garbage can icon to remove the existing texture and then assign it to our new image texture, denim trim seamless. And now we can go into our 2D pattern window and select all the patterns that we're going to want to change to this new material by selecting them and then holding down Ctrl plus Shift to add to selection. Once we have all these selected, we can then come back over to our object browser and select the Assign icon from our new denim trim fabric. And then repeating the same process we used before, we can select the Edit Texture 2D tool and proceed to resize and rotate this texture until it's looking more accurate. We can also use this black arrow tool that appears on the pattern itself to move the position and rotation per individual pattern. Next, we'll look at texturing something a bit more complex, which will be the fraying at the bottom of the jean legs. So before we create a new material for the frayed edges, the first thing we'll need to do is create the segment we want to have this texture. So I'm going to add in a few internal lines and then cut and sew these so that they will become separate patterns. Now we can create our new fabric by going up to the object browser and selecting the Add option. I'm then going to rename this to fraying and assign it to our image texture, frayed denim seamless. Let's then assign this new fabric to our cut-off segments that we want it to display on. And then resize it and position it again using the Edit Texture 2D tool. We'll then want to cut our side seams short as well so they're not hanging over at the bottom. Once this is done, we can then use the segment sewing tool to stitch together the two sides of our frayed bottoms. And then I'm also just going to go into the fabric properties of our fraying material and change the physical property preset to silk charmeuse, so it will behave more loosely in our simulation. We can then repeat this process for the other side. So for this last part of making our jeans, we'll be looking at how to create these patches and rips in the legs. Now for the rips, it will be quite a similar process to our frayed ends, but for the patches, we're going to use this tool here, the graphic tool. So once we select that, the file explorer will pop up, and now we can select the desired image for our patch. So I'm going to choose this alien guy here, and then now we just have to left click on the spot we wish to insert our graphic. And then we can either enter its dimensions manually here in this dialog box, or we can just resize it after the fact. So I'm just going to press OK, and then using this grey circle here, resize it and rotate it to my liking, and then using left click, I'm going to drag it into place. We can then repeat this process a few more times for the remaining patches, and then we'll be ready to create our denim rips. So for the denim rips, we'll again need to separate a new pattern. So let's go ahead and add in an internal rectangle and then cut and sew this from our jean legs. We'll now need to give it a new fabric, so let's go ahead and create another copy of our denim material in the object browser and rename this to Denim Rip 01. Let's then change the image texture to the corresponding image file, Denim Rip 01, and now we can assign it to our cutout square. We'll then again use the Edit Texture 2D tool to resize the texture and position it correctly into place. Then I'm going to repeat this same process for the second rip and copy in a new material with the Denim Rip 2 image assigned to it. And the reason I'm using fabrics or materials here for the rips instead of graphics is because graphics are meant to sit on top of the existing material below them. So because these rip images are transparent PNG files, they would still show up with denim underneath them instead of showing right through to our avatar's legs. So then I just continued following the same steps to create a couple more rips on the right side of the jeans, also playing around with their rotation and scale so they appear more random. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for our jeans, guys. I'm pretty happy with how they're looking, and now as you can see, we've got a nice pair of grungy looking skater jeans. So continuing on, let's get started on our hoodie. So if we quickly take a look at our reference image here, we'll see that the hoodie itself is made up of about 3 components that we'll need to create. The torso here, the sleeves, and then the hood itself. So I'm going to start by creating the torso element. So I'll go ahead and select the polygon tool, and then begin outlining the basic shape of it using left click, and then holding down and dragging it for the curved segments. And again here, I'm just using these small measurements that appear above each segment as I go to make sure things are kept in proportion and line up on both sides. Then once that's done, we can just use the Edit Pattern tool to clean it up a bit and make sure it's looking relatively symmetric. Next, I'm going to add in a new fabric and rename it to something like Hoodie Main, and then assign it to our torso pattern. We'll now want to complete our torso section by adding in a copy of this pattern for the back. So I'm going to open up our quick menu and again choose the Symmetric Pattern tool, so we'll get a linked mirrored copy, which we can then position accordingly in the 3D viewport. We'll now sew the shoulders and sides together using the segment sewing tool, making sure not to sew the arm slots together here, as we'll be attaching the sleeves to these later. We'll then simulate this so we start to get an idea of how our hoodie is sitting on our avatar. So I'm just going to change the color of our fabric here so we can see it a bit clearer. And what I'm also going to do is freeze our jeans. So what this will do is make them inactive in the simulation, thus speeding things up and also making it easier to pull and tug at our hoodie in the simulation without worrying about messing up our beautiful jeans. So we can do this by selecting all the patterns associated with our jeans in the 2D pattern window, and then opening up our quick menu and selecting Freeze. And now you'll see they've gone this light blue color, which means they won't be selectable anymore in the 3D viewport. So now looking at the fit of our torso, the first thing we can see is it's a bit tight. So let's go ahead and start fattening this out using the Edit Pattern tool. Maybe drop this collar down a bit more and stretch it out. And then drop down these arm slots and get them ready for our sleeves. So now going back and selecting the polygon tool, I'm going to start creating our sleeves. So we'll want to make this pattern in a sort of diamond shape, with the top of the diamond roughly matching the length of our arm slots. And again here, I'm just eyeballing the measurements, so it really doesn't have to be perfect here, as we can finesse it later once we've set up the stitching. We'll then select the Smooth Curve tool and just round out this middle point here, which will be where it attaches to the shoulder. We'll now position this in the 3D viewport ready for sewing. And actually, just before we sew it, we'll want to add in one more split point here on the shoulder using the Add Point Split Line tool. With that done, we can come up here and select the third sewing icon, which is the Free Sewing tool. So unlike the Segment Sewing tool, the Free Sewing tool is going to allow us to manually draw in our seams from point A to point B, no matter how many divisions are in between. So to demonstrate, I'll come down to my sleeve and I'll select the point where I want the first seam to begin from, which will be on the middle of the shoulder here. I'll then run down the rest of the length of the shoulder and click again at where I want the seam to finish. We can now do the same thing for the other side of our seam, which will be the front left arm slot. And now we should get a nice clean sewing line appear, ready for simulation. I'll then repeat this process for the back side of our sleeve. And now we should go back and select the Segment Sewing tool to simply close up this sleeve here by first selecting the left side followed by the right side. So now that we've got that simulated, we can see it's looking a bit too tight. So we can go back and widen out the length of the sleeves here using the Edit Pattern tool. And I'll also just once again ensure I'm updating the particle distance on some of these patterns to 10mm as well, so we get a nice high resolution result. And on that note, I'm also going to update the fabric properties here by selecting on my hoodie material in the object browser and then changing the physical property preset to Cotton Stretch Sateen. This should now simulate more accurately to what we would typically expect from a hoodie or jumper type cotton fabric. Next, I'm going to add in a new rectangle at roughly the width of the bottom of our sleeve. This is going to act as the end cuff for our sleeve. Let's then position this in the 3D viewport above our avatar's wrist, and then proceed to sew it to the sleeve using the Segment Sewing tool. Then similarly to our sleeve, we'll need to close up our rectangle by sewing the two ends together like so. So now that I'm happy with how this arm component is looking, I'm going to want to copy this over to the other arm. So let's do this by again opening up the quick menu and selecting the Symmetric Pattern tool. We'll then position this into place in the 3D viewport and then repeat the same process we used before, utilizing the Free Sewing tool to sew the sleeve to our torso. I'm then going to create another rectangle, this time for the bottom of our torso, which is going to be that elastic waistband you usually see on hoodies. So we'll just repeat the same steps as we did before with our cuffs, by first positioning the rectangle in the 3D viewport, then creating a symmetric pattern for the other side, and then sewing these to the bottom of the torso using the segment sewing tool. And we'll also just ensure the sides are closed up too by sewing together the ends. Then I just made some tweaks using the edit pattern tool to make this bottom of the torso area sit a bit more baggy over the waistband. And now I'm much happy with how that's looking, so we can move on to the next part, which is making the actual hood itself. So to create the hood, we'll select our polygon tool and then draw an outline that roughly covers the head of our avatar in the 2D pattern window. We'll then position this hooded shape in the 3D viewport accordingly before adding in a split point at the bottom of the hood for sewing. We'll then use our segment sewing tool to attach the hood to the collar of our torso elements, like so. Once we see that this is simulating correctly, we'll go ahead and create a symmetric pattern for the other side, and then repeat the same steps as before to sew it to the collar. This time also ensuring to sew the two curved lines of the hood together as well so it closes up. Then I'm going to select our two hood patterns and increase the particle distance to 10mm so it simulates a bit more detailed. And then I'm just going to reshape our hood till I'm happy with how it's sitting. So mostly using the edit pattern tool here to finesse this, but I also then added in a split point and gave it some curvature for the front opening, and that seemed to help it sit a bit better around the face. Once I was good with how it was looking, I then selected the lines of the front face, and then once again used the offset as internal line tool, followed by the cut and sew tool, to create an end seam for the hood. We can then use the layer clone over tool on both of these to make them a bit more thicker and rigid. What we can also do to make these more rigid is come down here under the simulation properties and set the pressure to something like 20. And what pressure will do is basically inflate the pattern. So if you imagine something like the ribs of a puffer jacket, that's essentially what pressure is doing. So the more we increase this value, the more expanded and balloon looking it will become. So I'm actually just going to pull this back down to about 10 because I still want it to be somewhat flexible and loose. So now for probably the most tricky bit of this outfit, which is the drawstrings coming out of the hoodie. So first off, we'll create the holes that they're going to sew onto. So let's go up here on the toolbar and select the internal ellipse. And then we'll draw an ellipse about half the width of our hoodie's outer edge here. And now with the ellipse selected, we'll pop open our quick menu and select the Convert to Hole option. Next, we'll create a rectangle at about 30mm in width, and then position it in the 3D viewport ready for sewing. Then, making use of our free sewing tool again, I'm going to first select the edge I want to start the seam from on the rectangle in the 2D pattern window, and then try and sew it to the outline of our ellipse in the 3D viewport. So the sewing has been set up, but it looks like the lines are potentially crisscrossing over, indicating that it's in the wrong direction. So I could undo and correct it here, but instead I'm going to fix it another way by just rotating our rectangle over till I see that the sewing lines are nice and straight. Then if we simulate this, it looks like I'm now getting the result I was after. Then I'm just going to sew the sides of our rectangle together now to create a closed pipe using the segment sewing tool. Now with our rectangle selected, we can go into our simulation properties and set the particle distance to 5. And then I'm also going to increase the pressure to about 20 so that our drawstring will inflate to become more pipe-like. And actually, maybe let's go even higher at about 60. So if you're lucky, your drawstring might inflate into a clean pipe straight away, but sometimes the simulation can get a bit glitchy. So rather than wait for this to figure itself out, I'm now just going to add in a split line near the top of our rectangle where it's smooth, and then cut off the glitched part and delete it. Then using the Edit Pattern tool, I'm going to slowly just elongate this rectangle till we get a non-glitched result. So this is a bit of a workaround, but I find it works well most of the time. I'm then going to create a little tab at the end of our drawstring. So I'm going to add in another split line near the bottom of our rectangle and then cut and sew to separate it. I'm then going to go down to the hole on our hood and use the Clone as Pattern tool to create an end cap for our drawstring. We'll then position this in the 3D viewport below our drawstring and set up the sewing again using the free sewing tool. We can then create a new fabric for our end cap, which in my case I want to be metallic, so I'm just going to name this to metal and then assign it to our two patterns. Then finally, we'll again use the Symmetric Pattern tool to create a copy of our drawstring and then proceed to position it in place and then set up the sewing with the free sewing tool. So now we'll move on to creating the last element for our hoodie, which will be the front pocket that you usually stick your hands into. So I'm going to select the internal polygon tool and then just draw a simple hexagonal shape on the lower half of our torso element here. Then I'm going to use the Edit Pattern tool to refine this shape a bit so it's looking more proportional in size. Before I then add in a couple split points and smooth them out for the main hand pockets. And then once we're happy with that, we can again use the Clone as Pattern tool to create a copy of our internal shape as a new external pattern. We'll then sew this onto our internal shape using the Segment Sewing tool, making sure here not to sew the pocket openings, only the top and small side seams. Then for the bottom seam, we'll need to add in a couple more split points on the torso itself in order to sew our bottom edge to it. Next, we'll then want to select the outer edges of our hand slots and then again use the offset as internal line to create some edge seams for our front pocket. I then also did this for the top edge as well. And then once we have those set up, we can proceed to use the Layer Clone Over tool to give them a bit of thickness and shape. I'm then going to select all of these and set the particle distance to 10 once again before simulating. And now we should see we're getting a nice clean result. So now I think our hoodie is looking pretty spot on. We just need to texture it and add in a few graphics to finish it off. So we'll go up to our object browser and select on our hoodie main fabric, and then let's add in an image texture here of our cotton seamless image located in the resources folder. I'm then going to click on the color thumbnail and change this back to white so it doesn't affect our image texture. We can then adjust the mapping of our texture by coming up here again to our Edit Texture tool and then using the Scale gimbal. Next, I'm going to utilize our graphic tool again to add in an image for the front of the hoodie, which I'll then adjust using the grey transform circle. I'm then going to repeat this process to add in another graphic for our sleeves here. And these images can really be anything you want, so feel free to add your own creative flair here. Just make sure if you want the image to have a transparent background, like my text one here, it'll need to be in PNG format with a transparent background. So now that we've pretty much got our finished outfit, what we might want to do next is add in some accessories or extras to finish off our look. But rather than create these from scratch, instead I want to show you how we can import previously made assets into our current file and how we can then refit and resize them. As for me, this is one of the most important steps in my Marvelous Designer workflow, as I don't want to be making entire outfits from scratch every time. So I tend to treat it much more like a virtual wardrobe where I'll repurpose garments I've made before and potentially alter them to be something else or just add it straight over the top of an existing outfit. Obviously there will be times where we have to create something from nothing, but you'll find the more you use Marvelous Designer and the more garments you make, the easier it will become to convert other creations into something new or repurpose them. Like for example, now that we've made this hoodie, we could potentially turn it into a rain jacket or a wool cardigan and so on. There's no need to completely start again every time. So continuing on with this, let's now add in our first asset by going up here to the main toolbar and under File, press Add, and then Project. And now if we go into our Resources folder and select the project file, Very Vague Bum Bag, we'll then get this dialog box appear. So we want to set the load type to Add, which will integrate it into our current file rather than just overriding everything. And now we'll see it imports along with all its materials. So the first thing we want to do is move all the bum bags patterns to a separate area in our 2D pattern window so we don't get any overlapping with our existing outfit. And by default, when you first import it, all associated patterns with it will be automatically selected, so it makes it easier to do this and move it out of the way. And so overall, it's imported pretty nicely. Sometimes it might require quite a lot of moving work to get garments to fit a new avatar, especially if you're buying assets from ArtStation or other places. But in this case, it looks like the only thing we're probably going to want to change here is the scale of the main strap, so it fits a bit better around our avatar's chest. In order to do this, we'll want to try and identify which patterns belong to where in 3D space. So this process I find is easiest done by just selecting patterns in the 2D pattern window and then locating where they are in relation to our avatar. So it looks like this group of patterns here is containing most of our front section. So I'm then just going to select these and then move these forward in the 3D viewport using the gimbal. And then I'll do the same for the remaining patterns and then shift them back a bit. We can then now simulate this and begin to push and pull on the straps until they're sitting better on our avatar. So it can sometimes take a few iterations of this process to get the desired result, but I find it's best to just gradually work your way around the avatar, pausing and restarting the simulation as we move different parts around. So now I'm happy with how that's looking. The last thing we want to do is unfreeze our jeans. And we can do this by simply selecting all our jean patterns in the 2D pattern window again, and then open up the quick menu and select the unfreeze option. And now everything should be simulating as one. And then there we have it, guys. Now we have our finished skater dude looking relatively stylish with this complete outfit we've created for him. So I hope you've managed to follow along okay, and you can let me know this in the comments or by leaving a like on the video. And stay tuned for the next part of the tutorial, where I'll be showing you how we can then run a cloth animation sim on our skater before taking this into Blender to polish it off and render it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.